Welcome back to Untethering Shame. I'm your host, Kira Wackett. In today's episode, we're diving into the complexities of self-discovery, navigating uncertainty, and embracing growth as a lifelong journey. Joining me is Kate Walls, a 25-year-old who's still figuring out her professional path while finding joy and purpose in her current work, restoring native plants in the beautiful landscapes of Charlottesville, Virginia. Kate graduated with a BA in psychology from Reed College in 2021, which is where I first had the pleasure of meeting and working with her. Our conversation explores the challenges of letting go of perfectionism, the shame tied to not having it all figured out, and the beauty of honoring the process instead of rushing to the destination. Kate's perspective will resonate with anyone who's ever felt stuck in the space between where they are, where they want to be, and where they've been told they should be. So get comfortable, take a deep breath, and join us for this insightful discussion on leaning into life's uncertainties with compassion and curiosity. Kate, I'm so excited that you're here and that we get to have this conversation today.
I'm excited to be here too, Kira.
I know I think about this. We met over Zoom pre-pandemic, but we still met over Zoom.
Yeah.
Like now I'm like, oh gosh, we did meet a long time ago, but it was still like in a Zoom setting. Now we're coming back in full circle, but it's crazy. I feel like how much time has gone by since that initial meeting, like just reflecting on, we've actually known each other. I mean, so Ev's almost 4.5. And I was I pregnant when we met? I don't think I was pregnant. So I wasn't even pregnant yet. Wow.
And
so you've known each other like 6 years. Yeah, that's crazy.
I know. It's a long time. Yeah.
And even just thinking when I was reading your bio and just seeing 25 pop up, I was like, no, that's not true.
I feel the same.
She's not 25.
I know.
She's like 18. She's 19. Yeah.
I just graduated college. What are you talking about?
I know. It's so interesting. Okay. I like to start every episode just doing a feelings check-in, which I feel like is something we used to do in so many different ways when we worked together. But I just am curious for you coming into today, just this conversation, just how you're feeling about life in general. What's one word that you would use to describe how you're feeling right now?
I can honestly say that I am excited and also a little bit nervous, but this conversation feels like very relevant to my life right now. And there's just a lot that is like uncertain and changing. And like, I'm still feel like I'm figuring a lot of things out. So I'm excited to share my experiences. And like, I know everyone has felt this way before, like literally everyone.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see what comes out of this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't think there's a way you could not have nerves be a part of it, just because there's already the tension of, I mean, you're saying this out loud, which means you're admitting that you don't know everything about what you want to do and who you are, which feels like the number one threat. Like you're supposed to have all the answers, right? Like, what do you mean you're 25?
Yeah.
We simultaneously think 25 or like 20s. You're like a baby and you know nothing, but also expect you to know everything and have every answer. And we have this like ridiculous expectation that a 20-something is both dumb and knows nothing, but also should be an expert in everything. And that feels like such a hard thing. So I can imagine there's anxiety in just admitting it, but then there's the other anxiety of you're talking about it while you're in it, which is not often the norm. Usually I feel like a lot of conversations are when someone gets to a place of resolve. And so I feel like there's just no way to uncenter that as a part of the conversation.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this earlier. Just that I feel like there are maybe certain like more accepted ways to like not have it figured out. And there's like certain like even certain like rules, I guess, about like, oh, it's okay to not have it figured out in this way, but if you don't have it figured out in this way, then there's something wrong with you. And it's like, whoa. Like,
yeah. Or there's like a certain amount of tolerance that we have. Like, here's your 6 main buckets, and you can have 1 or 2 of them that you're questioning or that you're making a pivot in. But if it's all of them, I think back to a
Mm-hmm.
client that I had. I think she was maybe later 20s, maybe mid 20s at the time. And she was making a big change with some friendship dynamics, just a lot of realizations about some unhealthy relationships, processing some really painful aspects with parents and some kind of trauma history. Also had a breakup with a serious boyfriend that she was intending to marry and spend her life with.
Mm-hmm.
So the one thing she felt like she hadn't like gone off the map with was her career. And I truly
Mm-hmm.
think that what she wanted to do really matched with what she was doing. I don't think it was she was staying there because she felt like she had to, but a lot of the conversations was like, I can't afford to not have this thing work. Even though it was what she wanted, the stakes of making sure what she wanted came to fruition, because it was like all these other things have fallen. What would it say about me if I
Mm-hmm.
can't at least have this? Like, I'm okay if this person doesn't have a serious relationship, hasn't done this, as long as they're career driven. Okay, great. Or I'm okay if they are, handling this, or they're starting their family, and that's okay. Then they don't have to have their career because they've got this over here. Like, there's this, again, just like a degree of tolerance that we have that seems quite limited overall.
Yeah, something else I've been thinking about sort of related to that is like when it feels like those big changes happen, like breakups or like friends changing, like it's sort of feels like, oh, I'm starting over, like I'm back to where I was before, like
Yeah.
I've gone backwards somehow. And this is something that like we talk about in like recovery spaces too. Like you're not going back to square one. You have all these experiences that you didn't have before that will inform you in the future. But it's hard not to feel like, oh no, I've gone backwards.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think about that. So when I was just kind of sitting with how to introduce this episode, and again, going back to this really brave, and also, I guess it feels like it was a brave statement to say, I'm 25, I don't have things figured out. And also, I'm kind of laughing, like, why the fuck is this brave? Like, this should feel normal. And like, so I had this kind of both and moment, and just being like, well, of course, you're trying to figure out what you want. I'm 36 and I still don't think I know the answers. And I know people in their 50s, 60s, 70s that are like, I don't know. I thought I had it figured out and I don't. And so, as I was reflecting on this, just thinking a lot about our cultural norms, and I think particularly being a very individualistic culture. So everything is you learning to take care of you and excelling and succeeding and taking that next step forward, mixed with this idea that we're very output focused. And so rather than somebody saying that they got their master's, or that they went to school, or they traveled here, or they did this, we think about, okay, well, what are the letters after your name? So it couldn't be I went to law school. It's I'm a lawyer. I have my degree, but also I've passed the
Mm.
bar. I've done these things. Or when I even describe, like, I could say I have a master's in counseling, or I went to school to learn about counseling, but there's something different when I say, well, I'm a licensed therapist. And it's all very much, I did these things to get to this end point. And I feel like in your context, there's this, well, we do everything to get to the next step. And the goal, I'm assuming, the expectation is that, so then when you graduate college, your life should be figured out. And now you're living in it rather than still building it. Is that kind of what you felt coming into that space or place?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, being in school, you have like like the built-in friends and built-in like things to do, and even like hobbies and places to go and stuff. But then, yeah, like for me, after college, decided to move back to my hometown, and I feel like I did that because I was sort of like looking for some familiarity and thought that that might help me deal with that feeling of like all the
Mm.
uncertainty of what I'm going to do. And like, I had some friends back here and I was like, that feels safe. And then I've been here for a few years now, and some of those people I was friends with, like, I'm not friends with anymore. And the things that I thought I might do here, I'm not doing.
Well, and when you went to college, what was the story you had in your head? Did you already know what you thought you wanted to do? Did you have an expectation of where you were going to land in 4 years?
No, to be honest, I was like, I just want to go to Portland, and going to college there will be a fun way to be in the city, and would also sort of like give me an out if I didn't like it, because I knew that I could like come back home in the summer or whatever. And then when I started college, I thought I wanted to major in classics, like Latin and Greek. And then I got there and I was like, no, this doesn't feel right. And I had been working through eating disorder recovery. So I was like, let me learn more about psychology. Maybe I want to be a therapist. And that's been something interesting too, because like in school, I didn't really know this until I got to Reed, but it's like a very grad school focused college. Actually, it's like, all right, we're here to prepare you to go to grad school. And I was like, well, that's not what I want to do. So it was kind of like, once I was there, I was like, all right, well, this is different than I expected. And then, as you know, like when I graduated, I was thinking that I would like maybe take a year off or something and then go get my master's in counseling. But I was thinking, let me try and like see what sort of jobs I can get before I like dive into the master's. Like I was sort of like afraid to commit to like more school and like more debt and all that time. So that's kind of where I'm still at. Like, let me see what I can do. And I think that's how I've gotten into this uncertain place, because I thought, oh, I'll just like go to grad school and become a therapist. And I think that's still something that I could do, but I'm sort of going on this taking more of like a wandering path instead of like the direct path.
Well, it sounds like you had this idea of what you thought you were going to do. I mean, and up until college, your classes are decided for you. Even in college, whether you go to a school like Reed or you go to a more science heavy school or whatever it is, like everybody's got a certain set of required classes that they have to take. So there's still this sort of external pathway that's laid out in front of you. And you came in and you had this idea of, this is what I'm going to do. And I think it's pretty cool coming in that you're like, I also just kind of wanted to go try out a different place, and seeing college as an avenue or a way to do that. What's interesting about that is, my guess is if you had wanted to take a year off after high school to just travel around the country or travel around the world, you would have gotten more looks or questioning than the reality being, I want to go try out a different culture, and college seems like a good way to do it because I'm satisfying everybody else's expectations. I think I want to go to college, so I'll go do that somewhere else. So just the idea that even that could still be couched in an expectation or a plan. And then you go and you're like, okay, this isn't for me. And kudos to you that you acknowledge that, because I think a lot of people even go through, I mean, I did. I went all through undergrad. Medical microbiology and immunology is my undergraduate degree.
Oh, wow.
And I say that I feel like all I was doing was to train myself on how to have semi-intellectual conversations with Jordan if he has to talk about something from work. Like, I don't use anything. I can understand the body enough when I'm doing like anything with the mental health side to explain it. But it's like, I didn't love it. But I was in that train. Well, I said I was going to be a doctor. I have to do this. I have to meet these expectations. And I was fucking miserable. But again, that notion of, well, you put it into the universe, now you just have to do it. And so there's this, I think, bravery again, and we're using that word a lot, but like a bravery in saying that's not what I want to do. Some of that I do think came for having gone through some really major hard shit, like with eating disorder, recovery, the depth of that work. I think you came face to face with, yeah, college is important. It's also like not the most important thing on the planet. You also were, second half of college or part of college and COVID. So like things were changing a bit, but then you still had this pressure of like, well, yeah, but you're supposed to go to grad school. Like you're going to go to grad school, right? And that's that subliminal messaging. So even leaving, it was like, I just got to gear myself up for this next thing and pick this path. And now you're describing it as this very winding road that it feels like you deserve to have more of that opportunity at earlier stages in life to be like, there is, I don't know, I would assume 7,000, 100 million different types of jobs and things that you could do. Sure, maybe AI is taking some of them now, but like still a pretty high number of jobs. How in the world am I supposed to know that? And just because I had like a touch in the mental health field, is that even what I want? Or I like studying the classics. Do I want to do that? Like what is ultimately a passion that I want to turn into a profession? And I could imagine that you have this well, now I've been doing this for a long time. When am I going to make a decision? But in reality, there's so much to explore. And when you're only half invested in the exploration because you feel like you should have the answer, feels like it's got to be even harder to make a decision on a path forward.
Definitely, yeah. You know what feels good and what doesn't. Like, you know what is right for you. And I often find that out through actually doing something, like, and just getting that experience. But the hard part is to be like, all right, I know this isn't right. I'm not going to judge myself for it. And I'm going to start to take those whatever action steps I need to do to either find something that is right or get out of this situation or whatever you need to do. And that part's hard because, there's like comparison and self-judgment, and just listening and trusting yourself are all like really difficult things sometimes.
Yeah.
Or at least for me, maybe not for everyone, but.
Oh no, I would be willing to assert that anybody listening would be in agreement, hence the shame undertone of, that self-trust is eroded based on our prioritization of external approval and motivation. Do you think that the scarier part for you when you were kind of coming to those moments where you'd realize like, oh, this isn't right for me, or, oh, I want to try this, or I don't think I want this anymore. Were you more stopped, or I guess maybe impeded by those internal stories, or were you afraid of the world around you, parents, friends, other people, and their reactions to the choices you would make?
I definitely feel like it was like the external, worried about what people would think or what they would say, or like how it would look, like potentially like in terms of like a job or something, like, oh, I only stayed at this job for 8 months. Like, no one's going to want to hire me now. Things like that.
Did anybody ever say anything? Like, did it actually come true where someone, like, have people made comments like, why don't you know what you want to do? Or why didn't you stay in this job? Has that come to fruition?
Not that I can think of right now. I feel like it's definitely like, I definitely tend to be like a people pleasing type person. And I know you've talked about this on your show before, but I definitely like think a lot about what other people are going to think, and often let that like rule my decision making. So
yeah. Well,
yeah,
it sounds less like it's what people actually think and more like your projection of what they could think and wanting to stop that from becoming the reality.
True. Or yeah, just like not even wanting to like, just like face that possibility, I guess. And that gets back to the self-trust of like, all right, like I can handle this, whatever people say or don't say or whatever they think, like they're allowed to think that, and I can handle it. It's okay.
When it feels like, I think for a lot of us, the fear is, when we've built our lives around what we do being more important than who we are. Like, I still think that about, gosh, I don't know. I think it was a high school principal. I don't think it was college. I think it was a high school principal, that there's this thing circulating sometime in the past 6 months that was basically like, finals are coming up, or maybe it was midterm, something to that effect. And like basically a note to parents saying, I want you to remember not everyone's going to get A's, and that doesn't mean they're not smart, essentially. And like recognizing there's future artists in here that don't need to pass their bio exam to be amazing and successful and to thrive in the ways that feel good to them. And it sparked a lot of conversation, I think, around, again, based on this idea, these mechanisms of, or metrics of what's the word I'm looking for? Metrics of measuring. It's a tongue twister.
Merit?
Yes. There we go.
Yeah.
You're going to keep me going. I was like, there's too many M's. Metrics of measuring merit. There we go. It's too intense and it's too singular. And so we, again, we're measuring our worth and value based on, did we get the A? Did we get into the class? Did we get the best part? Did we get the medal? Did we win? And I think that drives us to keep going to the next thing. Even the idea, I mean, I had it in my master's too, where I was constantly getting pushed then to be like, well, don't you want to get the PhD? You want that, right? You want to have that. I'm like, no, I fucking don't. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to do that. That sounds terrible. Who wants to do that?
That's too much school.
Yeah, exactly. And it's great for some people. But I could see how the deferment to somebody else's metric would win out over your own when you aren't sure what you want. And it's so
Mhm.
scary to admit that, and so scary to allow the gray to exist. And my guess is you're kind of like, well, I've been afforded a little bit of time. But if I were to say, let's
Mhm.
imagine you were 30 and you still were feeling like you were in this winding journey, or you were 35. Like, I just finished watching season 3, part 1 of Bridgerton. I don't know if you watch this
Mhm.
show at all, but one of the
No.
characters was like talking about she's in her 3rd season in the marriage market and doesn't have a prospect at the time. And like, she's going to be a spinster. Like, she's got nobody there. Like, that's
Mm.
her like belief in her head, because the whole goal from the time they're born until they get married is to get married and to have children.
Mhm.
And it feels very similar to that. And so it's like, there's a point where you start to go like, I'm a spinster in my profession, in my whatever. Like, what does it mean if I don't
Mm.
have, whether it's a partner or a community, a job, some sort of aspect of identity? And that starts to
Mhm.
feel really heavy. And that, I think, is where the default is. Well, then I'll just go to grad school.
Mhm.
I'll just do these things. I'll just take this on. And so the cool part is you're not doing that. But the important thing I want to
Mhm.
call it is, it doesn't mean that just because you started doing it, you don't feel the same pressure that other people do. You're really trying not to default back to the easier or more comfortable route, which is letting other people decide for you, or staying in something that doesn't
Mhm.
feel good for you, because the belief is then you wouldn't be worthy if you weren't doing it.
Right. And yeah, I think what's difficult about it, at least um, for me currently, is that there's no end date to this. Like you said,
Yeah.
like I could be feeling the same way in 10 years. Yeah.
Right.
And in a lot of ways that like is up to me. In a lot of ways it's not. But the difficult part about it is like with grad
Hmm.
school, it's like, all right, you got 2 years and then you get your supervision
Yeah.
and, same thing as like, sort of following the path. But this, I'm just making my own path.
Yeah.
And I think something else that, like, sort of going in a different direction is there hasn't been something when some people are like little, they're like, oh, I want to be a veterinarian.
Hmm.
I feel like I haven't had something like that, or something like that isn't in my life now, at least. So it's like I just try a bunch of different things, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And giving myself grace with that. But um, I guess like sort of having a passion or something like that is a plan in its own way. And so,
Mm. It sounds like the fear of, well, it's kind of twofold. So one, I should have an answer of what I want to do.
hmm
And
yeah,
it sounds like sort of the undertone in that, because even when you mentioned this before, of like the fear of, if I only stayed in a job for 8 months, and the opposite side is, you learned probably before the 8 months that that's not what was right for you. So like, why is that a negative if someone leaves a job a month in, when they go, this isn't right for me, and it's not right for them that I work in this role? But we have this idea that longevity weighs out. I mean, we see this with
hmm
relationships. We see this with how many years you've been doing X, how old is this? And
hmm
so there's this pressure to, again, have whatever it is that you do, and to do it and to be in that for a long time. Relationship wise, it's
hmm
even that same thing of like, I still have people like, oh my gosh, I have so many childhood best friends. Or I have all of my friends from high school still. And I'm like, I have none. So what does that mean? Does that mean that I
hmm
don't have deep and meaningful friendships? No. But I used to think that because of that longevity piece.
hmm
And so it sounds like you have that
yeah,
pressure matched with, and I don't have a passion. So if I knew what I was
yeah,
passionate about, like you again, you've experienced very deep mental health work, and you saw the impact
hmm
it can have. So that's like passion adjacent, because there's like buy into it,
yeah,
but it doesn't necessarily mean it's your passion. But if it's the thing that lights you up because it's had such a meaning in your life, I could see yourself trying to convince yourself to make it a passion, because you feel like you've got to
hmm
find something. And it sounds like under both sides,
right,
the underbelly to your story is, I'm not allowed to hop forever. I have to have an
hmm
answer, and I have to be able to commit to this longevity plan of being in a job or a career for 10, 20, 30 years, instead of saying, what if every year I had a different job and I was okay with that?
yeah. And I mean, really, when we're talking about it, valuing longevity over happiness, and so you want me to just like be unhappy?
Yeah.
Like, is that what you
Yes,
want?
that's actually what a lot of people want you to do, because that's what they've
that's just
done.
like, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's like I did this, so you have to do it too, and I was unhappy, so you have to be unhappy too. Yeah.
Well, and I think a very limited scope of understanding security, and this idea that, whether it's financial security, which I think a lot of us struggle with, but particularly when we think about past generations, it wasn't a career, it wasn't a passion. You had a job that would provide you and your family security, consistency in where you're
Right.
going, a predictability, a paycheck, whatever that is. And so I think there's this morphing that our generations have had, which is more around, you deserve to like what you do. But the system, the
Mhm.
infrastructure hasn't been built yet, at least in the US, to allow people to even explore what that would mean for them, because the system is still very much modeled
Mhm.
into, we funnel you through school, here's the conveyor belt, everybody's got to get a college degree. I mean, we've even seen that shift since COVID, and people being, I mean, before that too,
Right.
but what good is the degree? What am I doing with that? And so it very much funnels conformity and a certain way of living. But the reality is,
Mhm.
if we think about it, I mean, you and I have talked values so many
Mm.
times in our relationship. Like, if your value is security in the sense of knowing yourself, trusting yourself, and having enough resources, time, money, and energy to live a fulfilled life, who gives a shit if you go to grad school or not? Or if you try a different job every year? Why does that ultimately matter? And the comeback is because that would be too different. Therefore, that would be a threat to belonging. Hence, I'd feel shame.
Yes. It is a privilege for me to be able to do this. I definitely like acknowledge that, and like I don't have a baby or like a mortgage or anything that I have to pay. So even though it doesn't like always feel fun,
Mm-hmm.
I definitely am like, this is in a lot of ways a privilege that I can like move around, and I can put in time and effort and significant thought into what I want to do and like what feels right to me.
But isn't it interesting
Um,
that you don't even get to enjoy your privilege because you feel like you're fucking it up? You should have the answer.
yeah,
So it's interesting.
that's the thing.
Like,
Yeah.
then is it really a privilege? Like, again, we could argue you don't have, a family to feed. You don't have like circumstances that would force you to be in that position. But even that feels like a different conversation than this. Like, we're just talking about even somebody
Mhm.
being allowed to figure out what they like and what they want and to be okay with that. But I do think the interesting thing is, I think because of maybe certain expectations, cultural expectations, maybe it's race, gender, socioeconomic status, whatever it is, you do feel this pressure that maybe somebody else wouldn't in different circumstances, because they would be afforded maybe a bit more of like a permission to be focused on just kind of getting through things. And both sides suck, because in your side, it's, I'm
Mhm.
supposed to act a certain way. I can't enjoy the ability to explore because I'm doing something wrong. And on the opposite side, it's, well, we've built a system where you're probably never going to get the opportunity to think about these things because you're going to be stuck in the, I just got to survive the day. And both feel like they're a product of a system that's really not supportive of, again, everybody deserving to figure out what meaning they want their life to have and how they can create that in a way. I mean, I guess what we're really talking about is making a shift from an individualistic to a more collectivistic culture, where we talk about impact and meaning
Mhm.
and the collective experience that we want to co-create, rather than every man for themselves. And whether you have a job or not, we're going to find some way that you're screwing it up, and the pressure feels insurmountable to have all the right answers, and then to learn how to fake it that you're happy, when most people that
Mhm.
you've seen are secretly, or maybe not so secretly, miserable when they try to do that.
Exactly. Yeah, and it is hard to remember that in the moment of like, oh, my friend, has this job, but yeah, that doesn't mean they're happy, or oh, they have this relationship, but that doesn't mean they don't have problems too.
Mhm.
And I feel like COVID was one of those like really big shifting moments,
Mm.
because I mean, yeah, as you said earlier, I was in college when it happened, and I feel like a lot of people's ideas about like what work means, like, totally changed, obviously, from like going to Zoom, but also like, oh, maybe I don't need to like be grinding and hustling and like doing like working all the time and work is my life. Like, maybe rest and work-life balance is important to me, and like, how does that fit in?
I don't think we know how to do the two yet. So we're witnessing the like everybody was working so much, and then we kind of got into this period where it was like nobody wanted to work, nobody wanted to do like anything, and then it's like refinding the balance, and again figuring out what the system shift needs to be. And I don't know. As you're talking about this, I'm just thinking about, if we go back to you at, we'll use my daughter's age. Like if you were Everly's age and you think about, I mean, she talks about when she's a grown up, which she thinks is like, 12, and like all the things that her life is going to be, and the things that she gets to do. And she starts to dream. And that's the goal when you're a kid, is to dream of possibilities and to be able to keep that openness. And then as we get older, we sort of shut that down more and more and more. And it's like, well, the creative and the imaginative can't exist with the practical. So you need to be practical. And this is what it means to be an adult. But you still keep these like glimpses and these hopes of what things will be. And so I could imagine that you did have a certain idea of what life would be like, whether it was college, after college. And it sounds like things didn't match exactly what you expected them to look like. Like where you're at now is not the story you had been told of how things would be. And I can imagine there's not just the potential shame and judgment, but also some grieving that comes up in that too. And grieving the fact that your life doesn't look like what you thought it would be, even though the goal is to be in it and loving it and whatever. It feels like we need to make a pit stop towards grief at some point.
Yeah, definitely. In elementary school, like I was good at reading, and so that meant that like I was in the smart group or whatever, and then I was like, all right, I have to be in the smart group now, and sort of like held on to that like all throughout school. That made me think that I would be successful outside of school, but then the idea of what is successful like looks different for everyone. Yeah, I guess just like sort of grieving, like, yeah, like you said, just the expectation. But I also think there's grief involved, and then there's also goodness from that of like, that didn't turn out to be what I wanted, but eventually it can come to a place of I found this new thing and it's way better. But of course that takes time, and I guess you do have to sort of grieve what you thought would happen first.
Yeah. And I think, you just kind of laid it out where people that are in the quote unquote smart group, or they're pulled away to these advanced classes, or I was put in like the gifted and talented programs. They've kind of stopped those now finally in schools. And I still my mom says to me things like everything you touch turns to gold. And there's this like priming that happens when you're sort of picked. It happens on both sides. It actually happened to Jordan sort of on the flip side of he's the first person in his family to go to college. He's the first person to kind of make some of these shifts, and he went on to be a physician. But when he was in middle school and high school, it was like, he's kind of a punk kid. And like, I'm sure part of it is gender, girl versus boy, but also the people pleasing, the playing the part. And so I went through school very much being primed to this expectation of I have to be these things. And so that didn't allow me the same flexibility. Again, we can say privilege, there's privilege in that, but there's also a prison in that too of this is the path and this is what you do. And everything that led up to me deciding not to pursue medicine, my biggest fear was people thinking I couldn't do it and letting people down. But on the flip side, him basically having nobody believe in him, which meant he had to claw his way himself. Nobody was like, well, here's the path and let me put you in these classes and here's what you do and here's this. Like he had to figure it all out, but the stakes felt a little different to try for something and fail. The failing didn't feel as scary. I think the sense of like vindication, the sense of I did it and like kind of fuck you to everybody who didn't believe in him. I'm sure that felt bigger than it would have for me, but he didn't have that same piece. And so sometimes I think about that too of one of the only ways I think to get rid of the expectation is to get rid of the scaling. There is no better or worse, smarter, dumb kids and smart kids and strong kids and whatever. Like, we have to create a system in which everyone is seen as a person with different skills and
Yes.
opportunities to learn. And I think because it's so much of, well, who's the smartest person? What grades did you
Mhm.
get? We think about this in the eating disorder world. Both of our brains do that same thing. I have to be a certain weight. I can only eat
Mhm.
these things. I can only eat these foods in private. Like, all the rules that are rooted to,
Right.
because people with these grades, people with these looks, people with this body size are better. And so then that, like,
Right.
belief comes in, which I think leads us to feeling like the longevity is the primer and the
Mm.
seamless hop from thing to thing, and going, well, you're supposed to go from this to this to this, and then you have this beautiful, wonderful life. And in the back of our minds, we want to believe it so much that all of the work is for something, that we're like, well, I'll try it.
Mhm.
I mean, come on. And then you get there, and
Yeah.
you're right. There is a gift in going, gosh, I don't want this. And I'm okay with that. And I can see that things work out. But I don't think we've built enough of a conversation around that yet, that your shame doesn't come
Mhm.
along with you in that process and go, yeah, but also, and just like introduce the doubt and the shaming and the low self-worth talk and all
Mhm.
of that at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of two things. I feel like that is sort of like the eating disorder voice. Like, right when you're like, all right, I'm going to resist it, is like when it's the
Mhm.
loudest. And then something else I was just thinking about is like in school and stuff, when everyone's telling you, all right, do this, do this, do this, it never gives you the opportunity to be like, okay, like, what do I want to do?
Mhm.
And, like, what, like, you're not really thinking, like, yeah, is this right for me? Like, that's never really like an option or a question. It's always just like, all right, you're going to do this.
Mhm.
Everyone's doing this. Or if you want this, then you have to do this.
Mhm. Well, and I think that, like, overvaluing of intellectual ability and
Mm-hmm.
cognitive advancement and success being very content driven. What are the bullet points? What does your
Mm-hmm.
resume look like? What can you humble brag about and say that you've done or you're
Mm-hmm.
doing or you have? Again, if we think about ability or body size, things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a way, I'm grateful. I'm always going to have clients, because the two things that people never learned to develop that they're trying to learn is emotional intelligence and body intelligence. So, how do I feel my body without
Yeah.
hating it? And how do I understand what an emotion is and be with it long enough that it can move through its cycle? And we didn't get that. And I see it now, because
Mm-hmm.
Everly is, I mean, she's this incredibly expansive thinker, the way she views the world, and like, she makes me look like I have no emotional capacity. Like, her depth of sensitivity and awareness of people at
Wow.
4 is like crazy. Like, she will see somebody
Wow.
crying or upset, and she will wait and witness what's happening to see if they need her. She will come back to it. Even if it's like a kid that got hurt at the playground and we're still there for 30 more minutes, the kid's fine. She will go check on them before we leave. Like, she will sit next to somebody because she
Wow.
can tell they're having a bad day. Like, it's very intense in the loving,
Mm-hmm.
most wonderful ways. She's also
Mm-hmm.
very culturally, stereotypically cute as a kid. So she gets a lot of attention.
Yes.
So there's these three things that are coming together. And I'm like, oh boy, I see it, and I have to be mindful of it. And everyone will say that she's so smart. She should be going to kindergarten already because she's got another year of preschool based on her birthday. Like, no, no, no,
Mm-hmm.
we don't do that. She is
Mm-hmm.
exactly where she is, and she's developing at whatever pace she is going to develop. And our job is to let her explore and tell us what she's interested in, whether that is in preschool or
Mm-hmm.
in kindergarten, at home or somewhere else. Like, she wants to practice her writing, great. I'm not going to force that. If she wants to go play soccer, great. She wants to play flag football next, we're doing that. Like, she is
Mm-hmm.
in the driver's seat of exploration, because as soon as you start to go into that, you watch the paths change. She's suddenly going to get funneled a certain way. She's treated a certain way. And I don't want that. And then
Mm-hmm.
recognizing, if I buy into that, then I have to buy into the same thing that you and I did, which is, well, what the fuck? I don't know what I want to do. What does that mean about me? I'm supposed to be more successful. People have these thoughts of me. So what would that mean? And I see it in little things with her when she can't do something perfect right away. And I'm having to go, who cares? I want you to fail. I want you to fail all the time. Like she was scream crying at me because I wouldn't let her remake my Mother's Day card because she did a letter backwards. And I said, I don't want it perfect. I want this because this is the most amazing card I have ever gotten. And I want this. I don't want perfect. But seeing it and realizing how early it's happening. And so I think about this just for you going back. Let's say you're Everly's age. Maybe you're a little older. Maybe you're 8. Maybe you're 10. What do you want to or wish you could go back to say to you at that time so this didn't feel so heavy? Like, what could we be saying to our kids? What could we be telling ourselves now if we're doing that inner child work so we didn't feel so much pressure? Like, what we do and how we look is so much more important than that idea of self-exploration and learning to be who we are in the world.
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably like a lot of like what you were just saying about like, it's okay to fail. It's good to fail. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to feel however you feel. What would you say to yourself? Your inner child, 8-year-old Kira?
Oh, gosh. Oh, I think the biggest thing that as I've done some of this work and thinking about that shame of like reserving the right to change your mind. And I'm going through an iteration of it now as I'm realizing that I used to be pre-Everly, but like even more so as I get to know Everly and I get to see what fulfillment looks like when I'm not striving all the time, is I constantly feel like I have to be the person that people are like, wow, but also the person that can make everybody else feel that way. And like, that is like, it brings me so much joy.
You do make people feel that way.
Thank you. And it is a value. It's an inherent value, but sometimes shame steals it and then it becomes a pressure. And so I think if I could go back, I'd want to tell myself, you don't have to be the gold star all the time, but also it's not your job to make sure that everybody else feels like the gold star. And I think, I was going to ask you, so I'm curious because like, I don't think that I believe it fully yet myself. Because when you're like, it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to do this. And I wanted to be like, do you believe it now as you hear it? So I think it's still something I need to tell myself now because I don't think I'm there yet fully either.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's something that I want to believe. And like, if it was my friend or you or Everly, I'd be like, why don't you believe that?
Stop it.
You should believe it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely something that I'm working on. And I'm definitely, very like black and white thinking, like perfectionist, and just trying to get away from that and just like waiting and seeing what happens and trying to sit with that.
Yeah, it makes me think a lot about one of the things I'm trying to really focus on, because you and I have those very similar brain patterns. I think a lot of us that have gone through eating disorder recovery and have had the opportunity to come out on the other side of it, realize our perfectionistic standards. And it's a form of protection. It is a form of trying to make sure that we are okay in the world and to provide us a sense of peace internally. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is I can't get that trait out of me. That's who I am, but maybe I could reframe the way I'm viewing it. And so I'm working on this idea. It sounds like the stupidest bumper sticker, but it's this idea of like, I want to get perfect at being me in every moment. And the idea of that is that changes. That's the whole point of this thing is like changing our mind, changing who we are. There are days where being perfect at being me in a given moment means acknowledging that something I thought I wanted isn't what I want anymore. Or being okay when the me in that moment actually is going to have a pity party. And that is what I need. And I don't have to just like be okay and put the smile on or, the me is the person that, I've done it like 3 times in the last couple of months where I've canceled something that just didn't feel right to me. And I felt bad saying no in the moment. And I realized I needed to. And it's like, gosh, being perfect at being me is going, oh, there's this part of you that knows it's not right. Kind of like what you're describing, like learning to trust that and realizing the world didn't stop. Actually, everything's just fine,
Mhm.
and like
Yeah.
we've reflected, like we've now known each other for 6 years. You are in such a beautiful place as you've evolved and grown. And if we don't go back to content, yeah,
Mhm.
you don't have this amazing career that you're excited to spend the rest of your life doing. Okay. But like the you I've gotten to know now has been such a cool iterative process of exploring and learning and growing, and is like such a privilege to get to see. And I'm sure on the flip side, like you've watched me become a parent, you've watched me do all these things. Like
Mhm. Yeah.
that gets lost when we go, but in 6 years, I should have done this. I graduated college. It's been 3 years since I moved home. I should have done this. Instead of going, wow,
Mhm.
I've spent 3 years really getting to know what I don't want and what I do and who I am. And now I'm willing to have a conversation around it and be okay with that. And me 6 years ago might not have been willing to do that because I still believe the only option was the conveyor belt.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you had reached out to me like almost a year
Mhm.
before we're actually doing
I
this
know.
podcast. And I was like, I can't do it. I'm not going to have anything good to say. I have nothing going on. Like, I don't deserve this. And even today, I was like, I'm nervous. Like, I'm not going to have anything good to say. But I was like, I'm just going to show up and I feel safe with Kira. I
Mhm.
know whatever happens, it will be okay. And I'm gonna be fine no matter what. So
I love that.
I feel very I feel very happy about that, I guess.
When I'm curious now, so we did this, okay, let's think about you when you were 8 or 10. Now I want you to imagine that you're listening to this. And let's say it's a year from now and you're still in this winding path and you're exploring and you're learning and you're growing. What do you want to tell that person, that version of you, so you don't lose this belief? You don't lose this charge that's helping you continue to bravely make a path that works for you.
The thing that I just keep coming back to is just like trusting myself that I will be okay and
Mhm.
that I don't have to know all the answers and I think like we've talked about today in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal. And
Mm-mm.
I also like to think about, I never know like what this time may or may not lead to. Like it
Mhm.
may lead to something exciting, it may not, but I sort of have the gift of this time and I'm just going to see what happens.
Yeah, it sounds like holding on to that notion of it's okay to not have all the answers or to reserve the right that the answers might change for you over time, what feels right to you. I mean, I still joke like I was going to be a doctor, I was going to have multiple
Hmm.
kids, I was going to be married to someone else. I mean, my
Hmm.
life was going to look so different, and there has to come a moment where you go, "Oh boy, this isn't right." And I do think you said in the beginning, and I think it's so true. We've all felt that. We've all felt like something isn't exactly right for me, or I don't know about this. And for many of us in different ways, we've waved that gut check off. I'm like, no, just like get over it. It's fine in small ways and big ways.
Hmm.
And I think the gift that you gave in this conversation is, again, sort of recognizing that it didn't mean the shame of feeling like I should have the answers went away. But also, your world didn't end when you didn't get a graduate degree. Your world hasn't ended in the few years that you've been learning to explore these things. There are definitely moments that feel harder, probably than if you had a passion that you're pursuing and you feel a certain way. But there are parts that feel more
Hmm.
fun and exploratory because you get to be able to try different things on without the idea that it has to be this. And so I think it's kind of realizing it's the choose your pain adventure. There's hard shit on either path that we take, but you're either
Yes.
performing or you're living, and you're finding the courage to choose that second path and to not perform
Hmm.
because our cultural motivation or momentum pulls you in that direction. And so I think it's such a gift you gave listeners by sharing that today. Well, listeners, I think it's super important as you reflect on this, whether you are similar to Kate, you're in your 20s and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, or you're pursuing something and you're like, if I'm being honest, I feel the same way that she did. Or maybe you're in your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, and you're like, fuck, I've been doing this and I've been stuck and I don't feel that sense of joy and I feel sad, but also brave enough to admit that. And I'm going to start working through it. Just wherever you're at, be kind to yourself. Again, remember, each of us is making the best choice possible in any moment to try to do what's right for us, for the world around us. And sometimes we learn it doesn't fit for us anymore. Maybe it never did. And can you love yourself through that process? And can you be willing to say, what I can control is being honest with myself and being with myself now, and bravely making that next step forward in a way that feels most attuned to who I am and how I want to show up in the world. Kate, this is amazing. Thank you so much. Listeners, again, I'm so grateful that you're here. Make sure that you go down into the show notes so that you can figure out how to connect with Kate. You can make sure if you aren't subscribed already, you can subscribe. You can also send us a voice memo. You can respond to the poll. Let us know what you thought about this episode. And of course, stay tuned because I will be back in your inboxes and up on your podcast platforms next Sunday.